Today, I'm gonna tell you the secrets of what actually makes someone strong. Now, it's not about training hard and eating big alone. There's obviously something more going on. I'm not gonna tell you that any World's Strongest Man winner won because they outworked everyone. As sexy as that sounds, it's just untrue. There are people across the world with varying levels of experience working much harder than the world champions that you admire. But there's obviously something else going on. It's not hyper sophisticated training methods. It's not some secret magic formula they have. It's obviously something under the hood. Of course, I'm talking about the number one thing that makes you strong, and this is genetics. I'm gonna show a few examples of this, but I'm gonna highlight 3 genes here. And you're not doomed to your genetics forever. I'm not gonna get into it in detail, but there's something called CRISPR, which is technology where you can actually mutate your own genes. I personally believe this is the future of healthcare. This is the future of medicine and the future of performance. But with where you're currently at, there are 3 genes you can hope to be modified in order to be ungodly strong. The first one is the actin 3 gene. If you have the R allele, you are particularly adept to explosive power and strength performance. The next gene is the myostatin gene. Now, Eddie Hall has this mutation when he got his genes tested. If you have the R allele here, it inhibits the limit of muscle growth. So we have a double negative. It encourages muscle growth. And with these, you think about Belgian blue cows, the cows that have muscles stacked on muscles stacked on muscles. This is the deficiency or the mutation that they have. And the third one is the IGF-1 gene. If you have the T allele, this promotes satellite cells and muscle hypertrophy. Now, satellite cells are kind of like stem cells. They sit adjacent to muscle cells. And when the muscle becomes damaged through training, they are signaled to then help repair the muscle. This, of course, means that you're going to be able to repair muscle faster, train harder, train longer, and train with more frequency. If you have any combination of those 3 genes, you are very well set up to be strong. Now, some people are just built differently. I was obviously one of them, and I want to show you some examples from myself because it didn't always seem that way. When I was 13 years old, I made the high school football team. I went to the gym for the first time, and it was a home gym of a guy who was on the football team in grade 10 while I was in grade 9. We went onto the bench press, and he said, "How much can you bench?" And I knew that strong people could bench 225. So I said I could bench 225 because I self-identified as strong with no evidence to back that up. We couldn't put 225 on the bar, so we put 205 on the bar because his dad had one of those janky setups with small plates. I went to lift off 205, it didn't come off. I thought there must be something wrong. So I asked for a lift off. I got a lift off, and in my arms, this felt incredibly heavy. It came down my chest, absolutely crashed into me. I couldn't even push it off of my chest, never mind lock it out. I was trapped underneath the bar. I had to get older teammates to come lift it off for me after I just said that I could bench 225. And that is probably the most humbling moment of my manhood high school experience. But when I started training, things changed dramatically. Less than a year into regular training, I have a video of myself trap bar deadlifting 690 pounds. This is less than 1 year into training. And at 17, less than 2 years into training, I squatted 485 pounds. Neither of these were particularly pretty or textbook technique. That's a part of the process. Early in your lifting, you're never gonna have perfect technique. Now, for context, if that 690-pound trap bar deadlift was a 600-pound normal conventional barbell deadlift, which I believe is pretty reasonable, it would have had me ranked 17,232nd out of 250,000 lifters. This means that I was in the top 6.7% of all people according to Open Powerlifting. This isn't teenagers, this is everyone, grown men, everyone. And I did that as a teenager, less than a year into training. This isn't to brag, this isn't to show some macho, it's just to give an example that genetics play a colossal role. They don't just impact how much progress you're going to be able to make, they determine the league that you're going to be in. And how much you train and how hard you train determines to what level do you get in that league. But you're not going to swap leagues if you have bad genetics. Even the greatest deadlifter of all time, Hafthor Bjornsson, had a first 300 kilo deadlift. You can tell in this video that he did not have a lot of experience. He did not know exactly what he was doing, but 300 kilos with completely imperfect technique, he was just able to mong it up. Now this is 16 years before lifting 510 kilos. So even if you have great genetics, it takes some time to be able to expose that. Everybody starts somewhere, but where you start is determined by your parents, and where you start will indicate where you might be able to go. Now, like I said, genetics don't just help, they determine the league that you're playing in. Now, I personally have had full genetic testing done. If you guys want to know all the mutations that have allowed me to win World's Strongest Man, go ahead and pop that down in the comments. I'd be happy to share that with you guys. Now, like I said, the amount of time that you train for and how hard you train and all of the other variables are going to determine how far you go in your quote unquote genetic league. And that's number 2 points of importance, is that training age is the number 2 thing to make you strong. How long have you been trying to get strong? People often talk about goals for a month, for the next training block, for the next year, but these are things you have to talk about in 5 to 10 year increments. Oftentimes you feel like you're making no progress at all, but slow steps forward have you as a totally different person in 5 years' time. Now, here's how strength typically progresses. From year 0 to 1, your first year of training, you will experience a 30 to a 100% strength gain. A large part of this is just your body learning how to move weight. Year 1 to 3, you'll improve between 33 to 120%. Now, a lot of this is genetic within that variation, but even on the low end, you're increasing your strength by 33%. From year 3 to 6, you improve 17 to 40%. And after year 6, gains slow to about 3% a year until they taper off altogether. Now, when they taper off is very, very individual, but as you get older, especially after you pass 35 years old, it's hard to continue building strength if you've been training for a long time. Now, let's say somebody deadlifts 100 kilos on their first day of training. If they're genetically gifted and they're blessed and they're towards the higher end of the genetic curve with their response to training, it's entirely possible that they pull 200 kilos a year after they start training. It's entirely possible if they pull 350 kilos within 4 years of training. Now, in my own case, my deadlift went from 300 kilos to 475 kilos in the span of 3 years of focused training. This is not because I have a magical tool, not because I'm particularly lucky or knowledgeable. Now, that of course plays it plays a small role, but it does not mean that I know more, or anyone who deadlifts a huge amount knows way more. It's that we're genetically gifted. Now, you might know things, but it's not a cause and effect. Now, someone else might take 10 years to achieve their first 250 kilo deadlift. This doesn't mean that they've failed. It means that there's a different genetic ceiling. That's why I always encourage people to look at their own case, focus on the process, and refrain from setting long-term goals. And I know that's contrary to most people's popular advice, but long-term goals when it comes to strength, the likelihood that you're gonna hit the nail on the head with where your long-term goal should actually be is incredibly unlikely. For myself, if I set a long-term goal when I started in strongman, I would have set the goal of being a state champion. And of course, I've gone well past that. You might set the goal of being world's strongest man, but your genetic limit might be the national champion in Serbia, for example. If that's the case, you're gonna hit every potential milestone that you possibly can, and you're gonna be left incredibly disappointed. And vice versa is true. You might set a relatively small goal, accomplish that, feel like you're done, and feel very proud of something that you really shouldn't be all that proud of. Because all you should be proud of is how far you can expose the genetics that you've been given. Genetics set your starting points and they set your potential, but training age shows how far you've pushed into your potential. Here's one ironic part. When we think of genetics, you think every mutation to be as strong as possible is going to be beneficial, but that's just not true. If you have a lot of mutations to be particularly strong and gifted in the strength world, well, eventually you're going to get too strong for your own good. And the ironic part is sometimes being genetically gifted to being strong actually works against you. In the end, a healthy person is always a stronger person. This applies to systemic health. This applies to your athletic health and your musculoskeletal integrity. And it applies to your sickness. If you're sick, you can't train. You can't stay on diet. You will not be consistent. If your body is toxic from poor supplementation and poor decisions, whether that's alcohol or otherwise, or extreme dieting, it will not perform. And extreme dieting exists both on the high end and on the low end. And if your tendons, ligaments, and joints aren't holding up and they're not on par with your muscle strength, you're of course in trouble. Now, this is where we take someone like Luke Richardson, for example, and God bless you, Luke. I'm sorry that you're an example, but you're a fantastic example. Obviously, Luke is incredibly gifted for strength. He has won IPF Worlds. He's 2 times Europe's strongest man and an absolutely incredible strongman. But unfortunately, Luke is too strong for his own good. And he has torn his bicep, another bicep, a hamstring, a lat, and you get the point. Ironically, if he was slightly less genetically gifted to be strong, he would be less likely to get these injuries. And so he would be able to train consistently for longer, compete more often, and probably would be more successful as a weaker person. And this is where it's totally an art. You can't take one thing and assume that that's going to be your destiny. So even if you have poor genetics, well, poor strength genetics mean that you're going to be very healthy for a long time. And I'll share something with you guys with my own genetic testing. I don't have mutations to respond particularly well to resistance training. I have other mutations that help me considerably when it comes to getting strong. Now, indirectly, but nonetheless, they do help. So what actually makes someone strong? Well, your genetics determine your potential, your training age determines how far you're going to go, and your health determines whether you're going to be on the path long enough to realize your potential. Your strength expression will be your skill set. There are very strong people who will not be particularly strong in certain facets. For example, my grip strength when it comes to any sort of grip contest is not very good, but I've honed my skills to be very good at everything in strongman, including things that require grip in strongman. But that doesn't translate to every facet of strength. I would not be a great Olympic lifter the same way that Lasha would not be able to hold up in a strongman show without training and shifting his skill set from Olympic lifting to strongman. While I have hundreds of hours of informational content and exercise breakdowns in my members only section, it is well outside the scope of this video to cover every technical efficiency you can have, but I will share one study with you guys that I find particularly important when it comes to learning technique. In this study, they took two groups of people, and one group was instructed on how to run and the running technique that they should try to employ to be as efficient as possible. Another group was just told to go run. The people who were instructed had less improvements to their running efficiency than those who were just told to go run. Because when you get very specific feedback and instruction on what to do, you limit your body's degrees of freedom and you explore less. The other people who got no information at all, well, they were free to explore more. Their body was finding its own most efficient pattern, and through repetition, exploring those patterns leads you to be more efficient. And so in the end, practice is almost as important as getting instruction in the first place. To me, I think strength sports require a healthy balance, a good coach who can give you a couple of guiding points along the way. But one of the biggest misconceptions is that you need a new technique cue every week or 2 weeks, or that something needs to be fixed immediately. Sometimes all you need to do is practice. As a rule of thumb, you should not get technique advice more than once a month for every movement. That's because that's about the amount of time that it takes to set in and learn that technique. In the first 4 to 6 weeks of training, you are not going to do anything other than learn. And learning means that you can shift more weight only because you're more experienced. So let me know in the comments. Are you genetically gifted and lucky? Are you just starting your strength journey and you don't know? And do you think I'm off the mark on avoiding setting long-term goals? To me, it's the only thing that makes sense, but I would love to know your guys' thoughts. As per always, lift heavy, be kind, and we'll see you tomorrow.